Better UX through better client engagement. This is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart, so I'm excited to talk to you about it today. First, a bit about me. I'm Kuhl. I'm the Director of Technology at Chief of Full Service Agency in DuPont Circle. And I've had a lot of roles on web projects in my 10 plus years doing web development. I've been the acting UXer, content strategist, project manager, and developer on a number of projects, and these days I manage a team of developers and technical strategists, but I've also managed a UX team as well. So in my time in the industry, I've noticed that usually what determines the success or failure of your projects is not necessarily how good you are at your job. It's not always how much expertise you bring. It's whether or not you have the ability to engage your clients and stakeholders and get them on board with the vision so that ultimately it does get carried out and brought to life. So to get this to happen, to get your clients to really work with you, you have to demonstrate that they can trust you. And that means really thinking about how we approach UX and client engagement within that. So engaging as partners really means being willing to meet your clients where they are. Some clients are ready to do a dramatic overhaul where they blow away all their content, and some clients are not. Some clients say, we're basically happy with our website, but we want to improve this facet of it, or we feel like we've got a good structure, but our users are unhappy and we're not sure why. And in situations like this, rather than starting from a complete ground-up approach, you have to be kind of creative to figure out how to combine the information that your clients or your stakeholders, if you are on the government side, have about their users and their products and combine that with your UX expertise. So this presentation is tailored based on two kind of key beliefs. One is that you need to help your clients, as you're figuring out how to help your clients improve, you should keep in mind that your old website can be considered a prototype of your new website, and the user behavior on it is therefore very, very relevant. The second thing to keep in mind is that your clients know their users, sort of, kind of, mostly, and we're going to get to that a little bit more in a moment. So this idea that your old website can be considered a prototype of your new website was expressed really well by Hoa Loranger. I am probably butchering her name, so apologies if you ever see this recording. She's a VP of the Nielsen Norman Group. And she talked about how your old site is already a fully articulated implementation solving the challenge that you're trying to achieve. A new website for your business, or in this case, a new website for your government agency. She was not making the point that your old website is perfect and you should leave it alone or throw a new coat of paint on it. Instead, she was getting people to focus on the fact that you want to know why it's not working and improve it, not throw out the baby with the bathwater. So it's very rare that your client or your agency is going to come to you and say, like, we hate everything about this, blow it up, throw it away, although, full disclosure, that has happened twice, I think, in Chief's 30-year run. Usually, they're going to be coming to you saying, we know that our users are struggling, but we're not really sure why. And as UXers, our first instinct might be to talk to users and ask them what they want to see more of, or what they like and what they don't like. The first problem, which we should acknowledge, especially because this is GovCon, is that the Office of Management and Budget has certain restrictions that prevent you from just wholesale engaging a wide swath of users without going through a Paperwork Reduction Act process, which you can do and should do strategically, but it is a barrier that the private industry doesn't necessarily deal with. And the second is that no matter what industry you're in, to design the best UX, you have to pay attention to what users are doing, not what they are saying. There's a famous quote from Henry Ford that is apparently not actually from Henry Ford that says, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse, when he was going about working on the car. And the idea behind that is that users know that they're unhappy, but they are not the experts on how to solve that challenge. So while surveys can help you and while written user feedback can help you, you can't really rely on it the way that you can full usability testing, and often we're not starting out projects with full usability testing. We're saving that for the ideas that we come up with. So getting a deep understanding of how users are using the current site can really be helped if you talk to your clients. Most clients, or at least some stakeholders within a client organization, already know what users are looking for, what tools they're using the most, what tools and data are available for users, and what actions they're struggling to get users to take. They often don't know how to help them find what they're looking for, how to improve the tools that users are using, whether users need all the stuff that is on their website. They often don't. and how to get users to take the actions that they're struggling to get them to take. If they knew that, they would not be struggling. So that's where we come in. So by talking to your clients about these categories, you accomplish a couple things. One, you do get to know your users. Two, you get to focus your project not on general improvement, but on addressing the specific challenges that have already been articulated. And I'm not suggesting, to be 100% transparent, that you talk to your client and say, hey, what should we do on your website? You know it, you just tell us, because they can't answer that. That's why they've engaged you in the first place. Instead, you want to get a sense of what users are dealing with and then use your expertise to address it. So I'm going to talk about 5 key things in this presentation. 5 methods you can use to improve your client engagement. The first is knowing your sources, then getting insights into the content and behavior of your website and your users respectively, demonstrating to your client how your content is going to change, approaching the on-page structure really iteratively, and discussing your deliverables with purpose. So first, let's talk about knowing your sources. As you start looking at the project, you need to figure out who on the client side, or the existing team if you are joining a government agency yourself, can give you some of the answers that you're looking for. So you need to find out who gets calls or emails when people cannot find information, who has a really strong interest in key functionality. For example, I once worked on a project where one of the stakeholders was a complete expert in everything that was wrong with their search. They knew exactly how their search was failing users because it was an interest of theirs and they've been looking at it for years. Or the person who reads the 4C surveys or any other kind of survey you're using to creatively engage your users / get them to tell you why your site isn't working. And who checks the analytics, because often people are justifying how many people are visiting their site, and over time they've probably seen trends that can be helpful for you. Then as you engage these people, you can talk to them about how they're currently compensating for website problems. They might be compensating for really difficult to find information by having manual cross-linking happening in the body of pages. They might be compensating for a lack of automatic content relationships by hard coding. These are related publications, these are related events, these are related news. And knowing that they've been dealing with these challenges for a long time will help you identify them as critical issues to solve. As a bonus, if you build a system that works for them, they will like you more. So here's an example of a project where Chief worked on an overhaul where the client input was 100% critical. This is the old site for the Commission of Fine Arts, which reviews proposed designs from everything from coins to memorials to adjustments to the facade of government buildings. And there's a design review process that can be really challenging for users to navigate. When this old site was online, there was no way to submit online at all. So you had to mail or fax or physically bring your proposed concepts to their office downtown, and they were interested in making this something that was more online, although some level of physical artifact exchange was still going to be necessary. So the people who were currently receiving submissions had a really great idea of where users were stumbling and where this was not meeting their needs. So maybe users are remembering to include the vicinity map of the project area, but maybe that's incorrect, or maybe the site plan doesn't go into enough detail. So when we redesigned the site and added this online component, they could even see where users were still stumbling. So we wound up using their insight and our UX team's expertise to really streamline the submission process. We boiled it down to 5 key steps, and then we broke those steps up visually to make it clear how users would attack the process. If we looked at the page very generally, we could have seen where there was some ability to improve it, to make it look better, but we couldn't have guaranteed that they were the right ones without talking to the people who were actually receiving these submissions. So client engagement just became really key to being able to successfully improve this experience for users. So as a result of talking to the people on the client side who interact with us every day, you're going to figure out where they need to improve. Sometimes they know it immediately, and sometimes they don't. So the last step of knowing your sources is being able to agree with them on really measurable improvements. This might be an activity that you do with just your main decision makers. You might want to pull in some of these key people. So if the office administrator is getting all the calls about when people can't find things, you might want to pull him or her into this discussion. But the idea is that you want to define the metrics to improve, like the number of conversions or the time on site or the drop-off rate, anything where it's been a struggle for them in the past. And then, through the course of that project, you can meaningfully reconnect it to this idea as key performance indicators that show whether you're on the right track or whether you're on the other track. So your expertise as a UXer is really key for setting realistic, measurable benchmarks here. I've had clients who wanted to get their bounce rate down to 0%. Probably not going to happen, no matter how great the site is. So it's helpful to know that for a blog, this is the industry bounce rate. For an informational site, this is the bounce rate. For an app, this is the bounce rate. And you can provide a lot of really useful data for that. So through that process, you want to make the abstract concept of improvement pretty concrete and say this is what improvement looks like to us. So once you know your sources and you have a sense from them of current user frustrations, and also you can go to this meeting with me. Like, oh, I closed everything. You kind of broadly know some of the improvements that you might want to make. But in order to consider how you can make them, you'll need some insights into both the website's content and the specifics of current user behavior. So you can start by researching 3 major things as early as you possibly can. I'm going to talk about each of these in a little bit of detail. So first of all, content buckets, the current information architecture of the site and how that breaks down with a page count for each section. When you're embarking on a project, the really important thing to keep in mind is that the website already has content. You might not like it, your client might not like it, your end users might not like it, but your job is to figure out where you have the time and the energy and the resources to improve it and where you don't. Unless you either have a very small site that can be easily rewritten or a huge content development team with a long timeline, you are going to end up keeping a majority of the content that is on your site. And this process is about figuring out what you're going to keep and what you're going to jettison or rewrite. So it pays for you to know the content inside and out so you can focus your time and efforts on what's going to give them the most bang for their buck. So this is the type of template that we use at Chief. Basically, we run content inventories. If you don't know how to run a content inventory already and you are working on a project where you need to sell any sort of UX improvement to your user, do yourself a favor and get very familiar. Screaming Frog, Integrity, Xenu, all of these tools can crawl through your content and they can tell you exactly what links are on your website. And then from that, you can get a pretty good map of the total amount of content. So here, the largest site that I ever worked on, which is not this one, was 60,000 pages and 20,000 documents. No amount of clicking around as a UXer is going to tell you how much content you really have to work with there. You have to engage a tool like this one. So here, this tool is letting you paste in the results of your inventory, which is usually the URL is pretty much all you're going to care about. And then it's guessing what the top level directory is and what the full path is using a little bit of Excel magic. And then it uses that to generate this count breakdown. So you can see at a glance that there are, if you're looking at that screen, you can see, that there are about 639 items in the Connect bucket, 10,000 items in a folder called Summer Scrapbook, and 430 items in the Parks directory. When we redesigned nationalparks.org, we did something like this and right away could talk to our client about the fact that those 10,000 pieces of content were not in a place that supported the user experience. And rather than overhauling or enhancing them, it was better to say, do we really need this? We agreed that we didn't. Whereas with Parks, we could see that we were going to be making some pretty substantial improvements to that content, despite the fact that there was a lot of it, but it was key to the experience, so we invested our time and our budget in doing that. Doing an activity like this to give you something really informed will go a long way in the long run. Also, if you want to steal this tool, I have a link for you. So after you've gotten a sense of the content breakdown on the old site, you can start a prioritization activity with your clients. Here on another site, we wrote down what the major content buckets were, and with them we sat down to say what should we prioritize and what should we not. On a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the most important and 5 being no, kill it, we agreed to what was really necessary for us to support the user experience. And then throughout the course of the rest of the project, we could say to them, we agreed that this was a top priority. Are we sure we want to elevate this? We can, but then we're going to reduce how much effort we're putting into something somewhere else. Again, this helped us have a really meaningful conversation with them about the impact of decisions, not just about we want it or we have time and we don't have time. So when you're running this inventory, there are a couple pink flags to keep in mind. If you have a huge amount of content in a low priority section, you need to set aside time to talk with your client about getting rid of it. On one government site that I worked on, there were, I think, about 600 pages in the About Us section on a 2,000-page site. And the idea was we don't care about our about content, but they had so much of it that it was clear we were going to need to keep some of it around and needed to invest time in cutting it down. Also, if it's difficult to identify URLs for key sections, then you know you're going to have to expend some extra energy and research up front. And if there's a high volume of PDFs or documents, again, you know you're going to have to focus some energy in pulling content out of them or in communicating reasonable expectations for search and how users are going to navigate to that content, or accessibility issues for that matter. So the second major area to research up front is taxonomy usage. Sometimes we're coming from an old static site to a new content management system, but in this day and age that's pretty rare. Most people are going from an old CMS to a new CMS. And they probably have a lot of old taxonomy in that system that they want to figure out how to retool rather than figuring out how to get rid of. So if you are going from Drupal 6 or 7 to 8, for example, you can put together a tool like this using nothing but core Drupal functionality and views. And then you can easily see, okay, what taxonomy terms do we have and how often are they used? So you can help your client get a good map of topically what they're talking about right now, what they want to be talking about, and where, for example, they have a ton of terms that are only used once and are doing users absolutely no good. I highly recommend a tool like this if you are going from Drupal to Drupal. If you are going from another system to Drupal, you can get the same impact with some database querying, which goes beyond the scope of this presentation, but I'm happy to talk about later. And as you're looking through the taxonomy usage, you know that's going to be a red flag if there's a huge high volume of vocabularies, which can mean that people are a little bit it may mean that they're disorganized, or it may mean they're talking about a lot of things and they need to streamline, or that they're talking about a lot of things and they need to reflect it within their information architecture. If you have a lot of terms that are only used once, then that will mean that end users can't find good content relationships at times. And if they have pretty lengthy phrases as terms, you just might need some overall education about taxonomy during the UX process of the site. And then finally, user behavior. The most common way to get a look at user behavior is to review Google Analytics. It would be really great if the most common way were to sit down with a user and walk through how they use the site, but you have to talk to so many users in order for that to be statistically significant that can be a challenge all by itself. So if you want a quick and dirty look, Google Analytics can help you out a lot here. You can tell what browsers and devices are in use, what's most popular, how many people are completing conversion activities, but I'm willing to bet that pretty much everyone in the room knows that already. So instead, where I think you can supplement a lot, whether you're in government or in private industry, is with heat mapping tools. These screenshots are from Crazy Egg, and from this you can see a couple insights. You can see already this site really bucked the stereotype about the right rail. The most popular piece of content was in the right rail. So when we did a redesign of this, we wanted to make it a little bit more, make that content a lot more easy to get to because it was extremely high priority, and you can tell that at a scan. You could also tell that on this site, the whole above the fold, below the fold, I'm going to go ahead and call it a myth. This was not really important to these users, and of course it becomes less and less important as you introduce mobile content. So this gave us good talking points to talk to this client. So some good insights about user behavior, and even if you have restrictions on how many people you can talk to, if you can install a tool like this one and keep it running for a few weeks or a few months, then you can really get a sense of what users are doing on your site in a pretty unintrusive way. So you are armed with your insights into content and behavior, and you are starting to come up with real solutions that you can put in front of your clients. As you lay out the new information architecture or the new content structure, the number one mistake that people make is showing their clients or their stakeholders, here's the pie in the sky vision, here's how awesome your site could be, and not conveying the amount of work it's going to take to get there. So maybe you have a fantastic new sitemap, or fantastic wireframes for that matter. But the people you're talking to don't really understand that what you're also saying is that you need to redo a bunch of content, or that your migration process just got more complicated, or that it's going to need a lot more investment from them than they might have thought. So this can lead to a lot of hurt feelings down the road, and a lot of sense that we told the client, they knew exactly what to expect. Why are they upset now? I like this quote from Einstein. He said if he couldn't picture it, he couldn't understand it, and a good rule of thumb is not to ask your clients or stakeholders to be smarter than Einstein. Invest the time in helping them understand what you're really saying. And that is why, if you ask me for a sitemap, you are probably going to get one in Trello. This is a really, really lo-fi tool. It's very straightforward. It spends no time at all on the actual pixel perfect design that you can get with an omnigraphal sitemap. This is more about what the content actually is. So scanning this, you can tell that about us, news, events, and publications are your top level items, and then some more off to the right. And you can also tell that there's a key. So if it's orange, then that means that there's going to be some rewritten content. If it's blue, it's going to come in a pretty automated way. We don't have to worry about it too much. Purple is a link off site, and red is a brand new section that has never existed before. So here, talking with your stakeholders, you can not only say, this is the information architecture I recommend, you can also say, and this is how much work it's going to take from you. We're really going to need a lot of engagement on the multimedia section because we're not pulling that content from anywhere that exists now. We agree it's a great feature, but let's talk through how we're going to approach it. Or we need to make sure that when we're linking off-site, we're not confusing users. It's not going to be jarring when they click that. Or we're going to rewrite about us, our mission, and publications. Let's make sure we have the bandwidth for that. Simple site like this one, that's a quick conversation. With a large site, it can be a much more longer and more involved one, and the time that you spend on these visuals can really pay off. The other thing you might notice is that Trello has a built-in way to handle annotations. So our team, in that second column, has a little graphic indicating that there's more under the hood. If you have done a paper sitemap and you've had annotations, it can be really tough to have people flip from the sitemap to the annotations page and still figure out what they're looking at. But with Trello, you can just drop in a handy note like this, saying, this is going to be, this page is going to contain our board of directors, our staff, maybe a link to careers. It's going to pull content from these two existing pages. And then, while you're not getting into wireframes or on-page hierarchy, you know at a glance, oh, okay, I get what that page is. Something like this can be really helpful for your clients. Another way to help people visualize what you're asking them for is to include them in a card sort. So this can be done remotely using an online tool like Optimizely, or it can be done in person using this very technical display you see before you. In this photo, our clients from the Peterson Institute for International Economics came in to talk about how they could rejigger their taxonomy. They are a research organization, and as a research organization, they publish content on all kinds of different topics, and they needed to add new parent terms and reorganize it so that users could explore it more effectively on the new website, which was going to be a pretty substantial visual change and introduce a lot of functionality their old site had not had. So we brought them in and talked to them about both their research expertise and how well they knew both where their content was now and where they wanted it to go, as well as our UX expertise to talk through how this could go about transforming. And at the end of it, we had buy-in on what that taxonomy would look like. And when later we had to work with them to have them retag their content, they were prepared for it. They knew what to expect, and they, even when it wasn't necessarily fun, they were bought in enough to roll with it, rather than to say, look, when we changed our taxonomy, we didn't realize it was going to be this much work. They'd already seen it firsthand. Another example of a card sort that blended end user feedback and client feedback was the Federal Trade Commission navigation. So here, we had, this is the old site, and as you can see, it's got a pretty involved navigation. If this were not a graphic, and I were to roll over competition, consumer protection, you would see drop-down navigations that look exactly like that about navigation. It was very robust nav here. So the problem was that while this works okay for returning users and power users, and while it's intuitive for the people who are within the government organization, end users don't know that competition is where cases live. end users are expecting to see something that says cases pretty prominently. So we talked to the FTC about reorganizing their navigation and making it more topical in order to serve end users. And then we did a series of card sorts with both end users and with the clients themselves. And through being involved in that, we could get agreement that a topic-based navigation was going to be more effective for everyone, because the FTC stakeholders being involved in the card sort themselves kind of help them see, yeah, this is more intuitive. I can see by dragging and dropping content and really seeing how it will change, I can get a better sense of the impact I'm going to have at the end. So the fourth category here is approaching on-page structure iteratively. And what I mean by that is don't just show people wireframes and then at the end of it show them a website. If you do walk people and go into kind of a silo and work on what the structure is going to be and then come out and say, here's what we came up with for you, you tend to get this reaction from your clients. A lot of, whoa, that's not what we expected at all. And typically, it can be really tough to recover from something like that if you make a big reveal and that big reveal is not what they wanted. So if you want to engage your clients iteratively throughout the process of working out your content structure, you can do that by sketching ideas with them in a workshop, sketching ideas in a really low fidelity way that says, here's roughly how we can bring our content together. And we do this by having workshops with clients who have an investment in what that content might look like. And then you're still going to need to polish the requirements so that you have specs to build off, unless you have your developers really involved in that workshop as well. So here you can see going from a pretty rough sketch initially to a very detailed understanding of what the Peterson Institute for International Economics was going to look like. And then over here for the National Parks Foundation, there's another version of this wireframe that has clear annotations that would kind of guide people to a few different discussion points. If you are going to do annotations, then you want to make sure you're annotating just the items you want to talk about with your client as you show it to them. The idea is you'll have multiple touch points, so you just want to show them what they absolutely need to see. And you also want to make sure that you do not show the client all annotations you'll show your developers. Because if you're building a Drupal site and you're saying this is going to be an entity reference field and this is going to come from a node queue and this over here is going to be a view with a contextual filter, your client is not reading anymore. They do not care. So instead, focusing it on only 3 to 5 items to discuss is going to keep their attention a lot more effectively, and then you can still mark it up later for the project team you're going to share your work with. So when you want that feedback from your clients, there are 4 key ways that you can get it. The first is wireframe presentations, sitting down with them and in person saying, here's a wireframe, let's put it up on the screen and talk about it. Maybe here's, we sketched this together and here's what it came to. The second is sending them an Envision link or an Axure link and asking them to comment on it. And usually if you're going to do something like this, I recommend waiting until you've already had at least one wireframe presentation with them or one very in-depth sitemap wireframe workshop, because that way when you get comments, it's not going to be a huge surprise and they're not going to be shocked by what they see. If something has already been foundationally established and then you send over a wireframe that varies from it a little bit, there won't be much shock, and you can get meaningful feedback this way. The third, and my personal favorite, is doing demos of straight up content types and views in Drupal. Sitting down with them and saying, look, here's how it's going to work in practice. Does this work for you? Or doing HTML prototypes of interactive functionality and asking them to play with it and experience it and really get a feel for how it's going to function. Because if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a prototype will save you 1,000 meetings, and you can get more agreement up front. This also helps you avoid that ta-da moment at the very end of the project. You get more feedback and more insights that will help you improve your design process, and you avoid your client looking like that shocked cat when they see everything at the end. If you are uncomfortable with the idea of putting unfinished design or UX work in front of your clients, I highly recommend the book that's on the screen right now. This Discussing Design book is targeted at designers who want to improve their design work through critique, but there are a lot of good lessons in here for UXers as well. So finally, you want to make sure that you discuss your deliverables with purpose every time you talk to your stakeholders. It's Very easy to lose sight of the true purpose of your deliverables when you're working on them or when you're discussing them. So you may end up in a meeting with your stakeholders where they're saying, well, this piece of content really belongs in 3 different buckets of the sitemap because there are 3 different ways people might get to it. But you're not talking about how users will get to pages. You're just talking about the broad site structure and how they get to it if they're hovering over the main nav. So you can later, during wireframes, address having touts that will direct people to different pages or having related content view blocks. But right now, you're just trying to figure out what that what the broad content buckets look like. For wireframes, you want to get agreement on on-page hierarchy and functionality. You do not want to start talking about design, and making it clear at the outset of this discussion that there will be an opportunity to discuss that in depth really helps. Even showing people a wireframe from a past project and a design from a past project can help give them the confidence that they're not going to just see this black and white thing when they launch their website. It's going to wind up with a beautiful design, and seeing that another client has gone through that successfully can really calm nerves. And then finally, for designs, that's when you want to get agreement on look and feel, and you do not want to be line editing content, because line editing a PSD is a really great way to drive your designer insane and waste some budget. So as you're talking about your deliverables, you want to make sure that you're giving your client the opportunity to prioritize really informed decisions over easy decisions. Often we can get to a point where we want to wrap something up. We know that a certain vision is going to be the best one for the client, so we tell them, here's the road we're going to go down, and we sort of leave out the fact that once they go down that road, it's going to be really hard to course correct, or there are going to be some things that they might not like about it. It's just going to be the best road for them. So don't just tell people, we've incorporated your wireframe feedback, could you review? If you know that actually this new layout that they've asked for means they're going to have to rewrite about 60 pages or use a fallback. Or alternatively, if you are working with someone who really wants to see a lot of imagery and make their site very visual, but they are not prepared to go hunt up a photo every time they post a press release, giving them that guidance at the wireframe might not mean you have the best conversation ever, but it does mean that when you get down to the finish line of the site, it's much less likely that they're going to ask you to rework it because they hate seeing a placeholder image everywhere. Similarly, you don't want to just tell them this content will be related via taxonomy because the truth is complicated. You want to tell them, we want to relate it by taxonomy, but this does mean you won't be able to choose what appears here. It's going to be driven based on recency and how related it is. On the other hand, it's going to be easier to maintain. So would you, as a stakeholder, rather have something that's easy to maintain, or would you rather have something where you have absolute granular control over it, because that will impact some of the decisions that we make? In short, you want to make sure that you're telling people what the real impact is, and thinking about it like this, treating this like a script for the conversations that you have, will make sure that you're being really honest and earning that trust. So with this approach, you'll spend time retagging your content or untagging content, but ultimately your users are going to be able to browse it more easily. Or we can automate a list of related press releases, but because you really care about related publications, we're going to give you the ability to curate that, and that's going to be a little more complicated. Or once you approve the sitemap, it's going to be real challenging to change the top level items, but of course we can always add to it. So just keep that in mind as you think about your review. So in short, you really want to make sure that you're articulating trade-offs to your clients, and that will help them trust you more and ultimately help them engage with you better. And then at the end of the project, hopefully they will be as bought into the vision as you are, and you'll have fewer roadblocks. So with that, thank you guys for your time and attention. I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Cool. Thanks, guys.